Hello and welcome to Saturday morning at SQL Bits. My name is John McCormack and I'm going to be talking to you about managing and administering SQL Server on a budget. I've been working with SQL Server for around 8 years now and currently work as a contract DBA for Nebula Data Solutions. My presentation is called the Zero Budget DBA SQL Community has got your back. And the reason for that is there are so many reliable community-based tools available for SQL Server, tools that really help zero in on the pain caused by your SQL Server, and tools that help you automate away all the boring and repetitive tasks that you need to do in terms of managing SQL Server. So if your job involves administering SQL or managing SQL servers, then hopefully you'll find something in here that meets your needs. It's not just for people who are working on a budget, because some of these tools are the best in class anyway. So today we're going to take on the role as the DBA for Paisley Police Department and work through a number of issues faced in the day-to-day job. The slides for this presentation will be available on my website, johnmccormack.it. On there you'll find all the information surrounding how to contact me if you wish to have any discussions after the talk today. So we're going to talk about some of the best free of charge tools available for managing your SQL Server. Why would you use free tools when SQL Server is such an expensive product, especially for Enterprise Edition? Well, sometimes your organization can't pay or won't pay for extra commercial tools. Maybe they don't see the value. Some of the tools we'll discuss today, as I said in the intro, are the best in class anyway. There's really nothing better even on the paid market. Some of them, there's really not an alternative even on the paid market. So they're, like I say, the best option for you. All of these tools that I'm going to talk about today are tried and trusted. They've been used by thousands of people worldwide, in some cases for a number of years, and used very safely and effectively. Also, for the open source projects, you can review the code. So whether it's something that's plain T-SQL or whether it's PowerShell, you can actually look through that line by line and see exactly what you're going to be running against your SQL Server. So the drawbacks to using free tools, well, the main one is that sometimes larger corporations are a little bit wary of them if they don't come from a larger sort of enterprise company. The best thing you can do with that is understand the tools yourself and make sure that they're not risky to use, and look through the code if it's available and make that sort of case to your security team. But we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail as we go through. So the first one is a stored procedure called SP Who Is Active. It was developed by Adam McCormack, and it's the number one thing I use for finding out what is running on my SQL Server right now. So if I want to see what's running, I'll run SP Who Is Active. It gives you really useful information, such as it will help you find blockers. It can pull out the query plans for the different transactions that are running on your server at a time. And also a really neat feature is you can log it to a table so that you can do some retrospective analysis. If someone says, what was the problem last night at 11:30? You can actually have a look in at the table data that you recorded if you're running this on a schedule and see what transactions were taking place at that time. It's pretty lightweight. Each run should only take a couple of seconds. So it's something that I schedule every 10 minutes. It's completely written in T-SQL, so you can analyze the code completely, make sure you're happy with it. It's been available openly since 2007. It's had various improvements and iterations throughout that time. It's used by thousands of DBAs throughout the world. It's a very well-known and very heavily used stored procedure. And the creator, Adam McCormack, is a highly respected member of the SQL community and is a data platform MVP. Let's have a look at SP Who Is Active in action. But before we do that, remember I mentioned that we are going to be taking on the role of a DBA for the Paisley Police Department. So this is the Paisley Crime Dashboard. we have a couple of very basic reports in here, and one of them is showing all the serious crimes, and one of them is showing just all the crimes. And the queries that generate the information on that dashboard is what we're going to be working with as a little theme or thread running throughout the presentation today. So let's get into Management Studio. This is SP who is active. I keep it in a database called DBA, where I keep all my store procedures and just handy little functional scripts for maintaining my databases. So if we run this here, you can see that there's really nothing running at the moment. Okay, it's a pretty quiet SQL Server. There's no transactions to tell us about. I have a tool that was also originally written by Adam Mechanic called SQL Query Stress that I'm going to run, and I'm going to just run 5 different queries, but I'm going to run them 100 times over and 5 threads, so we can just build up a little bit of activity. So let's run this again and we'll talk through the contents. So take a few seconds to come back if there's a lot of activity. If it starts to take a very long time to come back, then you know that your server is under a bit of pressure. It's normally pretty quick. So here we can see there are 4 transactions showing at the moment, and they are all trying to run this procedure, p-select non-prank incidents. Okay, so this is the one that's giving us our serious incidents, the ones that don't have all those pranks on them. And so that first one there is giving us the query text, and we get that by using the parameter get full inner text. If we scroll along, it will show us the weight information. It will show us how much CPU is being used and how much temp DB. And one of the real top columns that I look for is the blocking session ID and the blocking session count. So if there is blocking going on in your session, this find block leaders equals 1 will mean that, you always get the blocking session ID, but the blocking session count will come up if you use that find block leaders equals 1. And that can kind of help you quickly get to, especially if there's a lot of blocking going on, let you get to the head blocker much quicker and deal with your performance issues. Get plans means that we're going to return the query plan as well. So if we want to see how that plan is performing, we can just click on the XML link, and that's going to show us the query plan. So this query plan is letting us know that there's potentially a missing index there. It may or may not be the best one for this query. However, it's good to know that there's probably something that we can do to speed things up. And we can see that we're doing a table scan of the main table which holds the crime data in it. That's probably the main things. Now, that's going to be similar if we run it again. So let's introduce a little bit of blocking. I'm going to run this query in a new window. And this query is the result of a fat-fingered officer trying to update the agency as NYPD for every row in the table, and he has it inside a transaction that he is not committing. So that should take a few seconds to run through. It's not a massive table. And if we're back in here again and we want to run the SP who's active, this is where it really shows you some very good value. So immediately we can see that there's a session that has a blocked count of 5 and then one that has a block count of 4. So if we go for the top one, we can also see that it is not blocked by any other session. So this is our lead blocker. If someone's telling you there's blocking on your SQL Server, you can find out what's happening and you can say, I see that this update is running and it's in an open transaction. So we need to do something about that. It's giving you the session ID of 69. So if we pop into session ID 69, we can either commit or roll back the transaction. In this case, I want to roll it back because we should never have been updating every row. And that again will take a few seconds to come through. With any luck, when we run this again here, our blocking should be cleared and the select transactions are able to move through unimpeded, which they are. So that's the main points of SP Who is active. I mentioned you can log to a table. If we just run this here, we can find out everything that's been logged to the table since the 4th of September. And I run this on a 10-minute schedule. It just means that it runs that query for a couple of seconds every 10 minutes and just gives you a snapshot of what is running at that point in time. And as I said, it will help you go back and identify any problems that were happening at a different point in time. Okay, so next on the list is the First Responder Kit, which you may know is the SP Blitz series of queries. And if you don't know about the SP Blitz queries, then these are ones that you'll want to get to know pretty quickly if you are a DBA. So SP Blitz is the sort of maybe the original one in the series. It's a health check for your SQL Server. And if you're taking on a new job, whether you're going to be a lead DBA or maybe the only DBA, if you're responsible for the SQL servers, it's going to be a great idea to run this and find out exactly how well configured your SQL Server is. SP Blitz first is going to show you what's running on your SQL Server right now. So similar a bit to the SP Who is active, but it has some other info in it. SP Blitz Cache is extremely useful because it will let you know what have been the most resource intensive queries that have been running on your SQL Server since the last startup. SP Blitz Index will let you know if you have the right indexes in place for your workload. It will certainly give you some very good pointers. And with the First Responder Kit, you can also run free Power BI reports that will let you see at a glance, especially if you're running the queries on a schedule, you can see how things have progressed over time. So let's have a look at the First Responder Kit in Management Studio as well. So again, it's in my DBA database, and we're going to run SP Blitz, which, as I said, is the main health check for your SQL Server. Now, this whole crime report for the Paisley Police Department started on one keen officer's own laptop, and that is where he's serving things from at the moment. It's probably not an ideal long-term scenario, but that's what we're faced with just now. So let's see what SP Blitz is going to come up with. This one can take a little bit longer depending again on how much is running on your SQL Server. I have realized that I didn't cancel all those other queries I was running for SP Who is active, so I've just done that now in the hope that this will come back. That's good. That's a lot better. So let's drag this up and see what we've got. What we get is a prioritized list of everything that's a problem. The lower the number, so the P1s, are your main issues. And then it goes in a sort of ascending list up to things that are kind of informational. And in between, you get things that you probably want to look at. But let's start with the priority ones. Okay, so here we see we're backing up to the same drive where the databases reside. That's right. The officer set this up on his own laptop and has everything on the C drive. It's not particularly ideal, and that's something that you're going to want to fix. We can also see that there are a number of databases that have not been backed up recently. So the master and the model and the MSDB database, which are your system databases, have not been backed up since the 3rd of February. Here we are in September. That's quite a long time to go without a backup. We also have another database, Nebula Data Solutions, that is in full recovery model, but without any log backups being taken. So what's going to happen is if you have a database in full recovery and you're not taking log backups, then eventually your transaction log is just going to fill right up. So we need to get those log backups taken so that we have the proper recovery model taken. We're also missing some DBCC checks. So these databases here all are lacking a check DB. There's never been one done for most of them, and for master it was done in 2019. So it really needs to get done pretty soon. So how are we going to fix that? So let's run a job to do all the backups. Now we don't need to do this top one, this full one, because we are not missing any full backups, but we are missing log backups. So if we give that a little run through, that will get the log backup taken for the Nebula database. And at the same time, let's run our check DBs. Now these are really small databases, so I knew it would only be a couple of seconds. If we go back into SP Blitz, we're going to hopefully have a much smaller priority one list. So there's so many configurations with SQL Server, and sometimes if you're in the position where you're going to be the main DBA for the first time, it can be a little bit intimidating. This is a great thing to let you know that you've got everything set up correctly. I've realized what I meant to do here, so I had a different job for the system databases. And if we run that, we can see that the list is down to, we've got 4 ones now. 3 of them are that we haven't backed up the system databases, and 1 of them is that the databases exist in the backups exist in the same location as the data drives. I possibly have the wrong name for the job in there, so let's just have a quick look at the jobs. Sorry, okay, so it's system database is full. And that's run that. That won't take long at all to run. In fact, without even checking, let's go in and run SP Blitz again and see if we have those errors removed. Fantastic. So we only have the one priority one, which I'm not going to address here. We have a few other things that we would just start working through in order. But for now, I'm quite happy we've cleared all the major incidents there. SP Blitz first is going to let us know what's happening right now. Now, there shouldn't really be much reported back here when we run this. It's going to run for about 5 seconds just to capture any analytics. And there's really nothing there of note, and that's because I've stopped running those transactions using SQL Query Stress. Kick those off again, and we rerun it. We'll hopefully get something back that's quite useful. Takes a few seconds longer now because we have some queries running. It is letting us know there are some slightly higher priority ones, such as there's high CPU utilization that is not SQL Server. The reason for that is probably we're recording a video on the same laptop that the SQL Server is running on. You wouldn't normally have other software like that running on your SQL Server, so it's good to kind of be alerted to that. And we can see what kind of weight stats we're getting. The top 2 are kind of around parallelism there. If you don't know what one of the weight stats is, or you want a little bit more information, you can click on a URL that is provided. So for the weight stats, it links to SQL Skills, and for a lot of the other ones, it links to Brent Ozar's own site. And it's really useful if you don't know what something is, that you just click on that, or you copy it into a browser window and look it up, and that will kind of help you learn as you go through and diagnose problems. SP Blitz Cache is a great place to learn what you need to start tuning. So if you have overall kind of pain and grumbles about your SQL Server is slow, and you want to see what is using the most resources, what are your most expensive queries, then SP Blitz Cache is a great way to find that out. What I'm doing here is I am setting the sort order to reads, so it's going to let us know which queries are doing the most I/O intensive workload in terms of reads, and I want the top 10. So the more that you return, the longer it will take to bring you back that data. And we can see actually that the top procedure is this SP cell non-prank incidents. So that has been doing most of the causing most of the pain there. And we have a few warnings. So we've got missing indexes, we've got parallel, and we've got the plan created in the last 4 hours. So The plan was created in the last 4 hours because we just started up the SQL Server not too long ago. For the other ones, missing indexes and parallel, you'll find also that there are some useful, Some useful links that you can follow there, and that will help you find the sort of information on that. If you don't know what one of the messages is about, then you can run that, and it will quickly give you some background, which is extremely useful. And the Blitz index, again, if we run it just without any parameters, we get actually a good news story. It says that we have no major problems, or I'm predicting it will say that. Let's just give it another second or two. Yep, so we have no major problems found. Nice work. So you could kind of rest on your laurels there, but if you want to dig a little bit deeper, you can use the mode equals 4 parameter, and it will give you back a little bit more detailed info. And we can see there's some lower priority items that we want to have a look at, such as wide tables, recently modified tables or indexes, or perhaps we're doing a lot of scans. These tables are particularly small though, so they will be doing scans. I'm really not concerned by that, but it's pretty useful info. If you want to run it on a specific database or schema or table or combination of all of those things, then you can pass in those parameters: database name, schema name, and table name. This is my main table in the database that has all the crime data in it. So if we have a look here, we can see that we have a missing index. It's suggesting that we can actually create an index. If we copy that out and bring it into Management Studio, let's just bring that down a bit so we can have it all easy to see. Then it's suggesting that we create an index on the category column and that we include the call description and the disposition columns in there. Okay, so I'm not going to do that just now, but it's good to know that info is there. The next thing I'd like to talk about is statisticsparser.com. It's extremely useful for query tuning. Now, whenever you're running something in Management Studio, you can set statistics time, IO on, and that is going to let you know how much IO has been used and how much CPU and duration, etc. are used for the queries that you're running. If they become quite complex queries, then that information can be pretty difficult to read. This site just lets you copy and paste that into a web page, and it will provide the information back in a tabular data, which is much easier to read. We'll also sum up all the different reads and durations, etc., so that you can get a total. It's great for measuring query, or rather for measuring improvement during query tuning. If you want to try things out, you can kind of look at the information side by side. So let's have a quick look at that one. Okay, so back in Management Studio, and this time we want to use the crime data database. I've set statistics time and IO on, as you can see up here. And we're going to run a query which is looking for all of the data from the calls for service table that are not pranks. So if you run that through, we're going to get everything back there. That took about 2 seconds and it returned 3,500 rows. This messages tab in here is where all your info is. Now, this is a fairly easy one to understand. However, if it's something that's joining to multiple tables, then all of these lines here, like this line here, you can get multiple of them. And it's a good way to add them up if we use Statistics Parser. So let's open up Statistics Parser. And let's paste this in. What we get here is, as I said, a little tabular format. It's showing us that query had 19,000 reads, and it took 2.2 seconds of CPU time. So it's all nicely laid out for you down there. It's pretty easy to understand. The primary things I'm looking at are logical reads and duration. But it could change depending on how you're tuning. It's really important, or really useful, I should say, if you're doing query tuning and you want to work through multiple changes, is to give the page a name. So I'm going to call this original. That's not how you spell original. Okay, and we can see up here at the very top, if you look at the browser bar, it's called original. And this is pretty handy for query tuning because you can open up a new tab and have them side by side and compare the results, which we're going to do here. So what I've done is I've actually got, so this table is a heap. It's really badly designed. It was the PC's first attempt at recording this data. He's now created one with a clustered index. Now if we run from this here, it was a little bit quicker. And if we want to paste this into statistics parser, so let's call this CX for clustered so we know the difference, and it changes up there in the page header. Then logical reads were really actually a little bit more because it's still doing a scan of the table and there's an extra column on that one, although it returned the data a bit quicker. So that's kind of the second one that we've looked at. Next thing is we know that we're missing indexes, okay? This was originally a big heap and then it just was created into a table with a clustered index key, but not much more. Let's create an index on the ID column and include call description, category, and disposition. Well, that's all the columns that we are returning. And if we run this query again, so we're still on the clustered one, because we know that's going to be the way forward, but we've got an index. If we paste this into statistics parser, so let's call this CX IDX1, so this is the first attempt at an index. We run that through, we can see our reads went down to 4,600, which is a good improvement, and our CPU time was about 1.7 seconds. The elapsed time was half a second, so that's the best that we've done so far, so we're definitely on to something here with the query tuning. Last thing we want to do is look at a filtered index. So because the query is looking for all the rows where it's not a prank / other, if we were to create a filtered index on here, run that through it, and then rerun our select query, and let's pull this data out. Let's give one final tab. So it's a clustered table and it's the filtered index. We can see that our total logical reads went down to 2,784. So we have these 4 different tabs here where we can compare all the different info between all the different queries and solutions, and it just helps us understand what the best route forward is that we want to go for. Let's scroll that back down. So that's statistics parser in a nutshell, extremely useful. Also, when you're pasting the statistics in there, which have things like your table names, it's all processed on the client side, so there's nothing to, you're not submitting any data to anybody about your table names. So closing a couple of these windows here to move on to the next one, we're going to talk about Ola Hallengren's maintenance solution. So maintenance solution is something developed by Ola Hallengren, and it really automates away the real boring SQL Server work, but the really, really important work. So things like managing your backups. If you were to write your own solution for all your SQL agent jobs for backups, for full backups, differential backups, and log backups, for the system databases and the user databases, then it takes a fair bit of effort, and there's no guarantee it's going to be as good as something that's been used and downloaded thousands and thousands of times. It's also used for things like index maintenance and integrity checks on your database as well. So it's not always the most exciting of jobs, but things that can be quite important. If you use maintenance solution, you don't need to write your own solution. It's still highly customizable and flexible, so you can set your own parameters within the jobs. You can set your own schedules. It deals with advanced features as well. So this is not just for natively backing up to disk. You can do that. You can also back up to blob storage. If you are using a third-party tool, such as one from Redgate or Lightspeed, something like that, then it has support built in for those type of backups as well. You just download the T-SQL and go, and there's a handy table called command log, which if you utilize it, which I recommend you do, you get the full history of everything that is running on your SQL Server. Go into Management Studio here and have a little look of things here. So the first thing is, when you download the solution, it creates all these stored procedures and tables and jobs. The jobs are created, but they don't have a schedule on them. So it's up to you to add the schedule as and when you want to run the different backups. So you could decide you want your full backups to run daily, but at the same time you want your log backups to run every 15 minutes. The system databases, you only want them to run daily, and you only need full backups for those databases. So for the index optimization, it's the store procedure is called index optimize, and you can pass in a number of parameters. So what I'm doing here is I'm passing in the databases. I want to do every database, but not the crime data database. What you want to do at different levels. So if it finds fragmentation less than 5%, it's not going to do anything because it's not particularly an issue. If it's somewhere between 5 and 30, you could reorganize your indexes. And if it's high, you could choose to do an index rebuild online so that you're not taking any tables offline at all while you do it. You can see here that the fragmentation high has two options, and the reason that there's a comma separated list there is if you were running a version of SQL Server that didn't offer online index rebuilds, it would go to the next one in the list, and it would do an index reorganize. Because this is a production database, we didn't want any risk of the database tables getting taken offline while the indexes are rebuilt, so we want to just do a reorg. There's also not much point in reorganizing or rebuilding tiny tables. So you can set a minimum number of pages parameter, which I've done here, which I've set to 1,000. You can ask it to update statistics at the time and only modify statistics. And you can set a time limit. So the time limit I'm setting here is 60, which is minutes. The reason for that is you might have a window that you want to do your maintenance, and if it's taking longer than that, then you want to just stop. The way the time limit works, though, is you can go over the time limit if the previous index rebuild is started before the 60 minutes. It will go on for as long as it takes to finish that, so it won't stop that on the 60-minute mark. And the kind of last important one here is I'm going to log to the table. That's the command log table, and it means that I have a history of everything that is run. So if we just run this through, we're in the wrong database, so that doesn't help. If we run this through again, this will be pretty quick. Okay, it's done some statistics for us, but it hasn't had any indexes that needed rebuilt there. Okay, because none of those databases really have anything particularly big on them. But if we want to find what's been run, we can use the command log table. The command log table is the best bit probably about the maintenance solution, in my opinion, because it just gives you a full trail of everything that's ever been done. And you can keep that for as long as you want. Now, I tend to keep it for, it depends on the system. You might want to keep it for a month or two. You might only want to keep it for a couple of days. Let's see what we've got set up here for the police department. There's a job that comes called command log cleanup that's part of the solution. So all you need to do is schedule it, probably once a day would be fine unless you're generating a massive command log table. And you just need to set the parameters in there. I'm just waiting for this to open up for how long you want to keep it. So I've kept it for 30 days. If there's anything older than 30 days in there, I don't really need to know anymore. I'm just going to get rid of that. It's really good for backups. In this instance here, I'm going to back up the Redgate database I've got on the server. I'm going to back it up to a location called eBackup. So here we are in eBackup. You can see that it's put the server name in first, and then the database name, then full, and then we have a time-stamped full backup in place. If we were to run that again, we're going to get one with a different timestamp on it. If we were to run the log backups, it would have a log folder, and if we were to back up other databases, they would all have their own folders within there. You can also back up to blob storage. So let's say we wanted to, let's just change this to make it a little small database, analysis DB. So we want to back up analysis DB, and we want to back it up to the Zero Budget DBA blob storage. If I run that in there, that's all I need to do, and that's going to back up to the blob storage. We're going to have a quick look at that. Okay, we are in the blob storage via the Azure portal, and we can see all the different backups that we've got in there. If I have a look in here, analysis DB full, we can see the one from today at 11:56. That's the backup that we just took. So it's really good, and it's very flexible between using your kind of disk-based backups and using cloud-based backups. You can also back up to file storage if you wanted to do something like that. Okay, so next up is dbatools, which is a PowerShell module developed by a huge community team, a SQL collaborative team. It started by Chrissy Lemaire. It started out as some migration scripts, but it's just now so much more beyond, which lets you manage almost every aspect of the SQL Server via PowerShell. It's the simplest way to get started using PowerShell for SQL Server. All the code is in GitHub, so you can look at every line of code that's in there if you want. There are loads of contributors. Where are we? Even me, a very, very tiny part, but still proud to have played a small part in that. There are more than 500 commands, and you really don't need to be a PowerShell expert. I'm certainly not a PowerShell expert, but it's a really good introduction to using PowerShell, and the more that you use dbatools, the more that you may also do other things. So let's have a look at some of the things that we can do with dbatools. So I'm here in Visual Studio Code, and what I tend to do is every time I use a command, I will save it in a folder so that I've got it kind of ready for next time, and I can just change the things that I need to change. The first one here is find DBA stored procedure. And the good thing about this one is this is helping you identify through all the stored procedures in your instance or even at a database level if there's some kind of pattern or word in your stored procedure that you want to look for. Then if you run this procedure, it will very quickly get you to the info you need. I used this when I was doing some query tuning and some performance tuning, and there was unbelievable amounts of blocking and quite a lot of deadlocks occurring as well. And I noticed that a lot of the transactions were running using the serializable isolation level. So one of the things you can do is you could just maybe run the serializable word in there. What I'm doing there is I'm calling the stored procedure. I'm looking for the pattern serializable. I want to select everything about it, and I want it in a grid view. So a grid view is a kind of easy way in PowerShell to review the information. You don't need to do a grid view. You could run it like this, and it would all come up down here where you have to kind of scan through. But if we open the grid view, you can see it's something that's quite easy to work with. So the bottom three here we can ignore. That's the SP Blitz and SP Who's Active stored procedures. And the reason it's there is it's looking for it as an issue rather than it's using it. The top one, though, I can see that my stored procedure SP cell non-prank incident script has the serializable isolation level in it. What's happened is we'll show you here. Like between these lines here. So line number 7, we've got from summary non-prank instance with serializable. Okay, so that's just a shortcut to find any info that you need. You can also get your backup history. So a database that I've backed up a lot recently is the Analysis DB. Okay, so it's running through getting the information on the backups for Analysis DB. Again, I'm going to use a grid view because I just find it extremely useful, and it will show me where all of the backups were. Now also, so it shows us when they were taken, it shows us where they were backed up to as well. So we have that path here, we backed up to that Zero Budget DBA blob storage, and we know how big the backup was. We can see it's compressed, so it was a little bit smaller, and we can find out exactly when it happened. It happened at 11:56:24. So the test DBA DB recovery model is a really useful one. Again, similar to when you're running SP Blitz, and it gives you some info on the health and status of your database instance. This one will let you know if you have a database that you believe is in full recovery model, but isn't really. What do we mean by that? So let's run that through and pull up the info. So I have two databases that are in full recovery model. One is called Crime Reporting and one is called Nebula Data Solutions. So Nebula Data Solutions was brought up by SP Blitz as being in full recovery model, but it didn't have log backups, which we then fixed. So this is saying that it's configured for full, and it actually is in full. The crime reporting database I just created a couple of moments ago, and I have set it as full recovery model, but there haven't been any backups taken yet. So because there's no full backup taken, then even if the log backups were running, this wouldn't actually work. So although we think we're in full recovery model, we're not in full recovery model, and I find that a really useful little bit of code to run. So the last thing to show about DBA tools is the Start DBA DB migration. And what this does is this allows you to move a full server, a full SQL Server over from one host to another, and you can configure that to whatever degree you want. There's so much documentation available, either by going to the DBA tools website or by running get help to get the information on particular commands. So this one here, we've realized that the officer started this on his own local machine, and now it's starting to get used a little bit more. He needs to have a better option, and he's decided to host it on a SQL VM in Azure. So we're going to do a migration from the desktop to the SQL Server in the cloud. So one thing just to point out here, we have our crime dashboard, and as I mentioned, it's running on this desktop machine. I've just put that in so that we can kind of verify that the change has gone through. I've got my DBA database because I deploy all servers with that, but I don't have anything else. I don't have any of the logins that are needed. So we've just got a SQL VM SA. So that's the name I was looking for in here, SQL VM SA. So I'm passing in those credentials to connect to the target instance, the cloud instance. I'm then passing in all these parameters. So we're going from localhost to the cloud. We're passing in the destination credentials. We're going to use the share path of the blob storage that we saw earlier. I'm going to use the backup and restore method. So it's going to do a backup and restore of the database. And we've got force true in there just in case you wanted to run this again and you had anything in place from a previous attempted migration. So let's run that through. The time's 12:09. And what we'll see here is we'll see because we set it to verbose, it's just letting us know everything it's doing. And if you had to do all these things manually, it's open to errors for a start. And secondly, it's very time consuming. So if you can automate a process like this, it might take a little bit of work in advance, but once you have everything in place, then the actual time where it comes to do your migration is very easy, very smooth and seamless. Now, this is backing up the database. This is going to take a few minutes to back up and restore, so I'm just going to pause the video and then we'll come back to it. So the script finished running there, and it took about 10 minutes, and most of that time was actually backing up the database to the cloud. The restore side was actually quite quick, and all of the other parts were quite quick. But we get this report here of everything that has happened, and we get a successful or a skipped status down the right-hand side. So I suppose the proof of the pudding will be in having a look at our new cloud instance now and seeing what we've got. So here in the databases, we had just the DBA database. Quick refresh of that, and we can see that we now have our analysis, crime data, crime reporting, the Nebula Data Solutions and the Redgate database. And the logins, we should have some logins created for that too. Sorry, let's refresh. Okay, so the logins are there and the databases are there. The last thing we want to do is actually just migrate our website. I'm going to make a very quick change here to a web config file. Just comment out the old connection string. Use the new one. So we can see that we've got the new server name in here, and we've got the user ID and password because we're just using SQL authentication for ease. Stop that and rebuild the project. There we go. So let's, drag that along to here. So here we can see that the crime data is hosted on Police Cloud SQL, and previously it was hosted on the officer's desktop. We've done a successful migration with just a few lines of code, and it only took a few minutes. So the final tool to talk about is DLM Dashboard. It was developed by Redgate, who are a third-party company who develop software to support SQL Server. They have a number of tools, and some of them are chargeable, but this DLM Dashboard is actually free. It's a schema tracking tool. It lets you find out who and what changed with regards to your database schema. You can download the T-SQL that was executed, and you can even get real-time email alerts. This allows you to label your releases, and it keeps the history much longer than something like the default trace. Why did I have come across this? Well, I worked with someone who was quite regularly changing the schema. He was adding and dropping indexes and things to fix performance, but it wasn't going through the normal release channel. So quite often something would change, might even get worse, and we'd want to know what had changed. We didn't always have that information to hand, but with something like DLM Dashboard, then that information was always available. So let's have a look at the web page here. So when you install DLM Dashboard, you can add various databases and servers to it. So I've set this up for the local host, and as you can see, we have the crime data database in here, and it's quite happy. Okay, there's no particular problems at the moment. Now, if we're going to SQL Server, and say we want to be a query tuning maverick and drop an index without any approval, then let's say we drop that index, the IX911 calls that was created earlier on. If we go back into the dashboard now, we can see that it already has this drift icon next to it. And if we want to review what changed, it will give us the full table definition, and it will show that it previously had this non-clustered index as part of the definition, and now it's missing. We can click on the download SQL link, and if we open that up, we can see that this is what was run. It was drop index 911 calls, and it was run by me. So that concludes today's tour of the free tools available to help you manage and administer your SQL Server instances using completely free of charge tools. There are more that I would have loved to have time to discuss, but it's only a limited session. If you have questions you want to ask about SQL Server and you think they're quick questions and you expect the answer to be a quick, easy reply, then the SQL Help hashtag on Twitter is extremely useful. For more complex questions, there's dba.stackexchange. There's something called Workload Tools, which I would have loved to demo. That shows you how you can capture baselines and benchmarks and do replays to test performance for your SQL Server. Also has a great tool, Workload Viewer, for graphically analyzing the output. There's Plan Explorer by SentryOne, which gives you more information and is more customizable than the graphical query plans in SQL Server Management Studio. There's SQLWatch.io, which is a free of charge monitoring tool. And there's also Grafana and Telegraph, which allow you to kind of roll your own monitoring solution as well. So I hope you found that useful, and thank you very much to the organisers of SQL Bits for making the event happen, and also to the sponsors who have enabled the event to take place this year. And I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.